Hello everyone, and welcome back to Guitar Tone Tested, where today we're going to be doing one of our most ambitious episodes yet. Well, our most ambitious episode yet. The other ones are pretty simple. This one, however, is taking a little bit more doing, and it's taken a little while to set up. So, the question is today is how close sounding are the guitar pedals on Boss Tone Studio? How close are they to the real counterparts? Now, this can be a complex sort of question, because when I actually got the Boss Katana, one of the reasons why I wanted it was because I had heard that, supposedly it included all of these effects, all these quote-unquote pedals that I love guitar pedals if you watch the channel for a decent length of time, but so I was hearing that you would have access to all these different pedals, which in technicality you do. However, it is not the whole story to just say you have access to these pedals. First of all, they're digitally emulated, but for the most part they sound fine. But the real issue for me personally is the controls on Boss Tone Studio, because no matter what pedal you're using, as long as you're within the same pedal type, like a drive pedal, pretty much all of the drive pedals are going to have the exact same controls. So some of them will have far less controls than they're supposed to, some of them will have way more, and so it can sort of mess things up a bit and make it it doesn't feel good to adjust and use in general, in my opinion. You can get good tones, of course, but you can't really think of it as a one-to-one conversion between having your modeling amplifier and then having the guitar pedal displayed before you. It's just completely different than actually owning the pedal. So with that being said, let's get more of the other boring stuff out of the way before we get into the actual tones. If you don't care and you just want to hear the tones, there should be chapters available on the timeline below, but I recommend hearing the stuff just in case. So from end to end, let's start with our guitar, which is going to be our classic Squier Stratocaster playing on the middle pickup position. It's my favorite position. Usually we're playing tuned in drop D. Then we are running that into our pedals in front of the amp, and I have made sure that the effects order in Tone Studio will be the same way, where they are supposed to be coming before the distortion, even though we won't be using distortion on the amplifier. Maybe we will. I don't know. We'll see. Either way, we have our guitar running into the pedal, and then the pedal running into the front of the amplifier. The amplifier is on the panel channel, which means that it will use all of the settings that are on the panel. I can adjust some of the settings on here, but nothing too important. The only things that I can adjust is the actual modeled kit that is on there, but I can't adjust the settings of like the equalizers or anything like that. And all of that is set to noon, except for volume and stuff that need to be turned down, and all of the effects are turned off as we start here, but we will turn them on, and we can control those through the app here, the application. And we are running, of course, I don't know if I mentioned it, we're running, of course, into the Boss Katana 2x12 combination cabinet. That said that weird. It's the 2-speaker version. It's the combo amp, not the amp head. And to record that and try and get the most accurate sound I possibly can, I'm using the Audio-Technica AT2020, placed roughly in the center of the amplifier's 2 speakers and pushed back, so that you are hopefully hearing a nice blend and accurate blend of those 2 speakers together, rather than just a very colored version like an SM57 right up against one speaker. So now we've talked about that stuff. If there's something else to talk about, I can't remember. There's affiliate links in the description to some of the stuff that I'm going to be using in this video, so please consider checking those out. I don't currently make a regular income, so it really helps me. And for a short period of time, when you sign up for Amazon Prime membership while checking out using one of my links, I also get a small bonus for that, and that also includes student plans, something like that. Okay, well, let's finally try and get into some playing. Now there are only actually a few that are, there's only a few settings that are actually labeled as that they're meant to be cloned from an actual pedal, and unfortunately I am missing. This had to have came down, right? So there's only a specific like handful of popular pedals that are specifically named in the Boss Tone Studio user manual, and otherwise the other ones are meant to be more of a generalized sound to get you closer to a general popular tone. So unfortunately I'm also missing like half of the named pedals, but I think this video will go on long enough as is already. So I will attempt to use what I have and show this off as best as I can. Okay, so we have all of our recordings going. We have 2 on the computer, 1 down here and 1 right there. So I'm gonna try and explain this fast so we can just get into it. Right here on our pedal cam here, we have our actual pedal, and then we will be using the booster function. We'll be using the booster function here to turn on the quote-unquote pedal in the amplifier and in the program, and we'll be alternating between these two. It might be a little hard to see the LED on the Ibanez tube screamer here, but oh well. So the first pedal we have here is the Ibanez TS9 tube screamer. Unfortunately, the exact model that was put in and emulated in the Boss Katana Tone Studio was the 808, but the 808 is just from what I know and have been told, the 808 is just a really more expensive version of the TS9 with more bass. So it should be pretty close still. Let's hear the Ibanez tube screamer with the drive at noon and the tone at noon, and we'll set the level wherever it needs to be for the recording. Let's hear some tones from the normal tube screamer, the real tube screamer. Alright, very cool. Now let's go into the Tone Studio here. We will turn on the booster and we'll set everything to noon. Now, one thing that really annoys me about the menu here is that the numbers are a bit strange on here, because it allows you to input values directly in terms of numerical numbers. But like for instance, the drive here, instead of going to 100, it goes to 120. So trying to get to like 75% is a little more difficult, because then you have to divide 120 by 3 instead of doing 75 like a normal freaking program. And so in this case, drive being at 60 means that's actually at 50%, like on our actual pedal here. I think this is much louder. Hang on. Crap, I just played all of that and it was with both of the tube screamers on. I was really liking the tone though. So, from what I'm hearing, it's actually sounding pretty close. The drive characteristics are extremely similar, if not spot on, if you ask me. There are some differences, but you also got to remember that they're technically different circuits that they're trying to emulate here. The katana version is technically meant to be better, or at least it's based off of the better version of the Tube Screamer. So it's a little different, and getting the controls is not very exact. I could try and sit here and match it up, but I think that it sounded pretty spot on from what we are already hearing. So let's move on to our next pedal. So like I said, unfortunately, I don't have a whole lot of options, but what I do have is the classic Metal Zone. This, I believe, is like an earlier 2000s Metal Zone. I don't remember exactly. I bought this a year or two ago used. This is where the Boss Katana Tone Studio really kind of pisses me off, because this is the case where you have significantly less control on the Tone Studio than you do on the real pedal. So you can get better sounds of the real pedal than you can out of the Tone Studio. Maybe that's a ploy to get you to buy the actual pedal, but I bought it used, so they still didn't actually get my money. Anyway, let's switch this. Okay, let me find the Metal Zone on here on the Tone Studio first, and we'll see what there is to see. So yeah, there are two tone controls that are pretty much across the board on the drive pedals, and it is one basic tone control and then a bass cut or boost. So compared to the controls of the actual Metal Zone, it's pretty stripped down and does not give you nearly as much tonal control as the real pedal gets you, and in this case I don't think that this even comes close to replacing the pedal. You might be able to use other settings. It could still be decent on there, but it's just not what I would have liked to see out of this. Anyway, let's see how close these sound, starting with the real pedal. Okay, so there was the Metal Zone. That was with the distortion all the way up and with all the tone controls set to noon. Now I have the drive turned up to 120 on the Tone Studio because that is the maximum, and then all of the tones are set to 0, which means that it's not going in any particular direction. It's not being cut or boosted in any way. Oh, I gotta turn it down. Okay. So that was interesting. Because you have significantly less control on the Tone Studio, they had to take some liberties. And so I think they went with a more HM2 heavy metal style sound. And they were pushing the mids and turning the mid control up. I believe I think the mid frequency up a bit as well, which unfortunately it can be loved or hated. It sounded really interesting to me there, but yeah, it's unfortunately kind of a downer because the Metal Zone is so much better than what this lets it be. And not to say that that was a bad sound, it's just not, it's way different than what I have here with all the tones set to noon. I wish that they would not add controls to what isn't there on these pedals and not take away from what the real pedals also have. So I probably could sit here and tinker with the Metal Zone to try and get it to sound the same as that sound, but I think that it can sound the same. Unfortunately, this is just kind of a thumbs down because the Metal Zone can sound tamer and more, I guess, sterile rock. It can sound more basic than what came out of there, because that's a distinctive tone that people will probably either love or hate, instead of being just a generally good distortion tone like the actual pedal can get with everything at noon. So let's move on to our next pedal. So our next pedal here is the Dunlop / Arbiter Fuzzface Silicon Mini. We will be testing just how different it sounds. So on the documentation, it says that this 60s fuzz setting is simply trying to clone a fuzz face. It didn't say which fuzz face because there's a different amount, and usually people will think of the red one before the blue one, but unfortunately I don't think it's really going to matter, as we'll see pretty quick here. I did a little bit of testing to make sure that this was possible. I don't know if my computer's actually handling this recording properly, but either way, let's show this off. So here is the real fuzz face with the fuzz turned all the way up and the volume set a little bit lower because that's just how it works for me. Alright, so pretty fuzzy, it's got nice grit to it, and yeah, so let's turn on the Tone Studio version and see what there is to see. So I have there are tone controls on this one, which there are obviously none on the real Fuzzface. So the tone controls are set to 0 still, and the drive is turned all the way up to 120, so this should logically be about as close as it can be other than the volume being different. Okay, interesting. So there's a bit to unpack here. To me, the sound does not sound fuzzy to me. Now, this may be a thing about, I don't know if that's how the germanium Fuzzface would sound like. If that's how a germanium Fuzzface sounds like, I don't think it's worth it. Because that just, to me, what was happening was that it was just a slightly worse regular distortion. It just had like a heavier gate, like a noise gate, and because I'm assuming because that is technically a characteristic of some fuzz pedals, but it's not. It doesn't feel the same, and it just feels awkward. And it did have a little bit of fuzz characteristic in the sound, which when I was testing, I did not hear at all. This time I heard it a little bit. Now, the reason why this probably doesn't work is because fuzz pedals are basically distortion pedals that just are made wrong. And because they're made wrong, it sounds technically bad, but we like the bad sound. Now, what is probably happening here is that maybe the circuit that is emulated and being processed, maybe it is correct, but it's probably also functioning technically better than it actually would in a real fuzz situation. Because I would assume that trying to simulate an audio hardware failure would not usually work right. But I don't know much about digital sound processing, but I know that distortions are already hard enough for a lot of, they were hard enough for a lot of companies to achieve. Nowadays it's a dime a dozen for emulated distortion, but for a while people hated it, all these modeling amps, because the digital distortion sounded like poo-poo. But now they figured it out. Unfortunately, what they haven't figured out is how to make the distortion worse and degrade like a fuzz pedal should. This setting has some fuzz characteristics, but I don't quite think it's a fuzz pedal. So a bit of a thumbs down. Okay, so now we're on to the last drive pedal that I have. Unfortunately, this is also not the name brand pedal, because we're going to be doing the actual HM2, the heavy metal, which this is actually also called the heavy metal, but this is the Beheringer version. It's pink, magenta-ish. So the real HM2s are just too expensive. They're decently priced if you're a person who buys pedals new, but for being used, they still cost like $150. So, you know, that's way out of my price range personally, and I probably would never really use it except for certain types in videos like this, so I will stick with my Behringer clone here. Now, as far as I know, this sounds almost dead on, except for it has a little less bass, basically. So let's switch this out and see how close this can sound to the digital version, and vice versa, but who knows. Okay, so I set the tones to the middle here on the pedal and put the distortion all the way up for simplicity. So let's see how the regular pedal sounds. Here's the heavy metal, the real pedal, but from Behringer. Alright, so there is our quote-unquote real heavy metal pedal. So now let's hear the digitally emulated metal pedal, heavy metal, HM2. It's not actually too far off based off the initial impression. Okay, so That honestly sounded pretty close. There were some differences, but that can come down to a few different factors. One being that I'm not using a real heavy metal Boss HM2. Another reason being that once again the Tone Studio has completely different tonal controls than the actual heavy metal pedal, so they probably have a little bit of creative liberty taken here in terms of what tone is presented as the pedal, because you don't have the mid and low control like you do on, well, they might have converted it to actually do that now that I think about it, but it's highly unlikely. I think there's that bottom control which is always there, but I think that the tone control is still just the same tone control that goes for all of the pedals, at least the emulated pedals, I mean. So that is all of the actual pedals that I have. There's one more that I want to try, but I'm probably gonna wait to record that one for a little bit because it's a little bit more I have to set up that I didn't do. And then there aren't many modulations or ambiances that are specifically meant to be cloned by anything or cloned off of anything. They're just kind of modulations that are there. The only modulations that I know that are cloned off of something was a couple EVH Eddie Van Halen branded Dunlop. I believe also they would be MXR branded then. So they had a couple, a flanger and I think the phaser, but I might be wrong. They had those actually labeled and named, and oddly enough, the only other one that was actually named was the Dunlop Crybaby G95, the very basic Dunlop Crybaby, which I actually got on my last vacation to Wisconsin, and I buy guitar pedals from Wisconsin. And this is the other thing that I want to try out, but I have to set up the expression pedal, which I hadn't done, and I'm getting tired. It's later at night, so I'm hoping I will get this done. Okay, so I am back to do our final test, which should be this Crybaby wah, and I'm a little unsure of it. Under the modulation and effects, there's a setting to have a pedal called wah 95E, and I believe, if I remember correctly, it said that this was trying to replicate the Dunlop Crybaby Classic 95. It's called the GCB 95. I believe that's what it said it's trying to replicate, even though there's the E on the end of this. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know if that's supposed to mean expression or something. But basically, that is semi-irrelevant in this current moment because I don't know how to map the expression pedal to work with these effects. I only know how to change the pedal effects option and get it to work with the expression pedal other than the volume pedal option, which comes default if you don't manually change this stuff in the program. So in this, it doesn't say specifically which Crybaby wah it is. It just says, oh, never mind. So under the effects type, there is like 3 different wahs, and one of them is the 95E. So I have selected that, and now that is taken care of. So now this should be a pretty close comparison, hopefully. The other thing is that I have wired the Crybaby wah into the effects loop so that it will come after the distortion. I'm going to be working on my distortion channel so that we can hear a little bit more of the characteristics of the wah, since clean it's pretty passive on a clean tone. So yeah, I'm using a distortion to try and make the differences or similarities more obvious. Now the only thing I haven't done is adjusted my volume to make sure that the wah, not my actual wah, won't be too loud, because obviously there's no volume on the wah pedal, so I need to adjust it on the amplifier. So let me do that quick. What? Okay, I figured out my issue. I was having some difficulty with the effects loop being turned on and stuff. Okay, so now I've set the levels for the amplifier, and they, I think, are roughly even for the amplifier wah and my real wah. Like I said, the wah is going through the effects loop, so they'll be more definite about what you're hearing. So I'm using the Roland EV-5, I don't know exactly based on the text down here, but I found this expression pedal for $50 at a different pawn shop the same day I found this at a pawn shop, but they were different stores, oddly enough, and I had just bought this amplifier, and then we found this expression pedal, so I got it. There's a knob on the expression pedal, and it lowers the amount of expression that's available. I don't know why it does that, but it's turned all the way up so that there's full expression. Other expression pedals may feel different, may act different, especially that apparently there are potentiometers in the expression pedals, which is how it sends the signal based on the resistance, and if the potentiometers and the expected resistance is different, they may not work right or have the full range. This obviously should be compatible because they are both Boss, Roland product, so they're both made by the same company, so they should be fully functional. But I just wanted to let you know about that. Another thing is that there may be a slight bit more bass, I guess, to my real guitar pedal here, because it has to run through two longish chords. I believe they're probably 10-footers, so there's a little bit of maybe not impedance, but there's a little bit of tonal drop off that might happen from that length, but it should still be an accurate test. But that's all stuff I should warn you about, just in case, some tone nerd's gonna come at me being like, this is all wrong. Alright, so let's start with the real pedal. Okay, so there's the normal pedal. Now let's turn on the in-amplifier effect. Okay, so that is very interesting. So they do sound very similar. They're very close. And I believe there are only minor differences happening here, such as the quote-unquote fake effect has more volume, but that's sort of to be expected and can be adjusted in the tone editor here. Unlike a real pedal, you can actually control the total volume that will happen here. So if you're getting too much of that brittle sound, if it's too loud on that, you can turn it down on the setting while not turning down your entire amp like I had to for the real effect. Another thing that can be done here is you can adjust the minimum and maximum of where, the effect will end in its position, I believe, something like that. So if you want when your rocker is all the way backwards, if you want the lower setting to be not quite as in the dark side, then you can turn it up, I believe, and then it will be a little bit brighter and end in a different place. It's just something to experiment with, but I don't know if I can describe it properly. I feel like I might have described a lot of things poorly in this video, unfortunately, but I think that the test results were still very good. So we have a very close match. So to try and recap, this is the next day for me. The Tube Screamer sounded very close, even though they're not even the same model of Tube Screamer. The fuzz sounded nothing like the actual Fuzzface, but it was a Fuzzface silicon. But either way, the digital fuzz did not really have very many fuzz characteristics. The Metal Zone sounded like it sounds like it is a Metal Zone. However, you do not get nearly the control on the digital Metal Zone than you do on the real Metal Zone. So the digital Metal Zone is kind of stuck in this higher end kind of grindy sound. It's not the worst sound, but it's not your average distortion tone that you hear on the radio all the time now. And then the heavy metal, the Boss HM2, which we compared to the Beheringer heavy metal, still sounded very close. They were both very close. However, that was with the settings turned to noon on the tone knobs. If you wanted one of the more crazy sounds on the heavy metal, like turning everything all the way up, I don't know for sure if you'd be able to achieve that on the Tone Studio, because they don't give you these same controls that are on the pedal. They just give you these generalized controls of one actual tone knob and then a low end booster cut. Let's just say that. That's not the word I was looking for, but that's what I'm going to say. So, do the pedals sound the same? Sort of. They do sound, for the most part, they sound like the pedals that they're trying to emulate. However, they can be disappointing for certain people like me who want to feel like they're actually experiencing the pedals. However, will be very disappointed because you do not get the same experience whatsoever as having the real pedal when you're using the Tone Studio. You can get some sounds that can be either spot on or somewhat similar, or at least vaguely similar in the case of the fuzz. But yeah, you can get some tones that will be somewhat like the pedal. Unfortunately, they will not be exactly the pedal for the most part, unless they're very simple, like the Tube Screamer, where they only have the 3 knobs. In that case, you'll have more tone, you'll have more control. But in some cases, you'll have less control, and it can be very disappointing and very different. So if you found this video informational or helpful or entertaining, then please leave a like. For all the actual pedals that I've used, there will be affiliate links in the description. Please use those if you consider purchasing any of these, or just using the link, and if you use that same tab to go and buy something else, then that still helps me as well. I do not make any regular income at the moment, so it really helps me out. This channel is normally a music and 3D printing channel, so we talk about guitar, gear, and review it, and talk about some certain subjects around it sometimes. Then we also talk about drum and bass gear sometimes, and certain subjects around those. And then we have 3D printing, where we talk about 3D printers, review 3D printers on occasion, and talk about some issues here and there with that. And also, more recently now, I'm trying to show off some projects that can help you just in everyday life, but these first few are going to be kind of specifically music related. So if that all sounds good, please consider subscribing. I know this video has probably gone on long enough, so that's all I have to say for now. So I'm gonna say bye-bye.